I understood neither the meaning of the Mass, nor the role of the priest at the altar. All this was to me magic, more splendid and elegant than Olga's witchcraft, but just as difficult to fathom. I looked with wonder at the stone structure of the altar, the finery of the cloths hanging from it, and the majestic tabernacle in which the divine spirit dwelt. With awe I touched the fanciful shaped objects stored at the sacristy, the chalice with its shining, polished interior, where wine changed into blood, the gilded paten on which the priest dispensed the Holy Ghost, the square, flat burse in which the corporal was kept. This burst opened up one side and resembled a harmonica. How poor Olga's hut was by comparison, full of its evil-smelling frogs, rotten pus from human wounds, and cockroaches. When the priest was away from the church, and the organist was busy with the organ at the balcony, I would stealthily enter the mysterious sacristy to admire the humeral veil which the priest used to slip over his head, and with nimble movements slide down his arm and loop around his neck. I would stroke my fingers voluptuously along the alb place over the humeral, smoothing out the fringes of the alb belt, smelling the ever-fragrant maniple which the priest wore suspended from his left arm, admiring the precisely measured length of the stole and infinitely beautiful patterns of the chasubles, whose varied colors, as the priest explained to me, symbolized blood, fire, hope, penance, and mourning. While mumbling her magic incantations, Olga's face had always taken on a changing expression that aroused fright or respect. She rolled her eyes, shook her head rhythmically, and made elaborate movements with her arms and palms. In contrast, the priest, while saying the Mass, remained the same as in everyday life. He merely wore a different robe and spoke a different language. His vibrant, sonorous voice seemed to buttress the dome of the church, even awaking the sluggish old women sitting in their tall pews. They would suddenly gather their drooping arms, and with difficulty raise their wrinkled eyelids, resembling shriveled, heavy, late-cut pea-pods. The bleak pupils of their dimmed eyes would glance fearfully around, uncertain of where they were, until, finally, beginning anew their rumination of the words from the interrupted prayer, they rocked back to sleep, like wilted heather swayed by the wind. The Mass was ending. The old women thronged the aisles, jockeying to reach the priest's sleeve. The organ fell silent. At the door, the organist greeted the priest warmly and gave me a sign with his hand. I had to return to work, to sweep the rooms, feed the cattle, prepare the meal. Every time I came back from the pasture, the hen house, or the stable, Garbos would take me into the house and practice, at first casually and then more eagerly, new ways of flogging me with a willow cane, or hurting me with his fist and fingers. My welts and cuts, having no chance to heal, turned into open sores, seeping yellow pus. At night I was so terrified of Judas that I could not sleep. Every slight noise, every creaking of the floorboards, would jolt me into attention. I stared into the impenetrable darkness, pressed my body into the corner of the room. My ears seemed to grow to the size of half pumpkins, strained to catch any movement in the house or yard. Even when I finally dozed off to sleep, I was disturbed by dreams of dogs howling through the countryside. I saw them lifting their heads to the moon, sniffing in the night, and sensed my approaching death. Hearing the calls, Judas would sneak up to my bed, and when he was quite close, he would jump on me at Garbos' command and maul me. The touch of his saliva would make me rising blisters on my body, and the local man of cures would have to burn them out with red-hot poker. I would wake up screaming, and Judas would start barking and jumping at the walls of the house. Garbos, half awake, would rush into the kitchen, thinking thieves had broken into the farm. When he realized that I had yelled for no reason, he beat and kicked me until he was out of breath. I remained on the mat, bloody and bruised, afraid to fall asleep again and risk another nightmare. In the daytime, I went around in a daze and was beaten for neglecting my work. Sometimes I would fall asleep on the hay in the barn while Garbos looked for me everywhere. He found me idling. It started all over again. I came to the conclusion that Garbos' seemingly unmotivated fits of rage must have some mysterious cause. I recall the magic incantation of Marta and Olga. They were meant to influence the disease and such things that had no obvious connection with the magic itself. I decided to observe all of the circumstances accompanying Garbos' attacks of fury. Once or twice I thought I had detected a clue. On 2 consecutive occasions I was beaten immediately after scratching my head. Who knows? Perhaps there was some connection between the lice on my head, which were undoubtedly disturbed in their normal routine by my searching fingers and Garbos' behavior. I immediately stopped scratching, even though the itching was unbearable. After 2 days of leaving the lice alone, I was beaten again. I had to speculate anew. My next guess was that the gate in the fence leading to the clover field had something to do with it. 3 times after I went to that gate, Garbos called me to him and slapped me when I approached him. I concluded that some hostile spirit was crossing my path at the gate and inciting Garbos against me. I decided to avoid the evil one at the gate by scrambling over the fence. This hardly improved matters. Garbos could not understand why I took time to climb over a high fence instead of taking the short route through the gate. He thought I was mocking him on purpose, and I got an even worse beating. He suspected me of malice and tormented me ceaselessly. He amused himself by jabbing a hoe handle between my ribs. He threw me into beds of nettles and thorny bushes like an unwanted cat, and afterwards laughed at the way I scratched the stings on my skin. He threatened that if I continued to be disobedient, he would hold a mouse on my belly, as husbands did to unfaithful wives. This terrified me more than anything else. I visualized a mouse under a glass cup on top of my belly button. I could feel the indescribable agony as the trapped rodent gnawed its way through my navel and into my entrails. I pondered various ways of casting a spell on Garbos, but nothing seemed feasible. One day, when he tied my foot to a stool and tickled it with the ear of rye, I recalled one of old Olga's stories. She had told me that a moth with a death's head's pattern on its body that was similar to the one I had seen on the uniform of the German officer. If one caught such a moth and breathed on it 3 times, the death of the oldest member of the household would shortly follow. That is why young married couples awaiting their inheritance from living grandparents, spent many nights chasing after these moths. After that, I made a habit of wandering around the house at night when Garbos and Judas were asleep, opening windows to let moths in. They came in swarms, starting an insane dance of death around the flickering flame, colliding with each other. Others flew into flame and were burnt alive or stuck in the melting wax of the candle and were trapped. It was said that divine providence had changed them into various creatures, and that every new incarnation they had to endure the sufferings most appropriate to their species. But I was little concerned with their penance. I was looking for just one moth, though I had to wave my candle the window and invite them all in. The light of the candle and my movement startled Judas, and his barking woke up Garbos. He sneaked up behind me, seeing me candle in hand, jumped all over the room with swarms of flies, moths, and other insects. He was convinced that I was practicing some sinister gypsy rite. On the following day, I received exemplary punishment. But I did not give up. After many weeks, just before dawn, I finally caught the desired moth with the strange markings. I breathed on it carefully 3 times, and then let it go. It fluttered around the stove for a few moments and then vanished. I knew that Garbos had only a few days to live. I looked at him with pity. He had no idea that his executioner was on the way from a strange limbo inhabited by disease, pain, and death. Perhaps it was already in the house, waiting eagerly to cut the thread of his life as a sickle cuts a frail stalk. I did not mind being beaten, as I stared intently at his face, looking for the signs of death in his eyes, if he only knew what was awaiting him. However, Garbos continued to look quite strong and healthy. On the 5th day, when I began to suspect that death was neglecting its duties, I heard Garbos cry out in the barn. I rushed there, hoping to find him breathing his last and calling for the priest. But he was only bending over the dead body of a small turtle he had inherited from his grandfather. It had been quite tame, and lived in its own corner of the barn. Garbos was proud of this turtle, because it was the oldest creature in the whole village. Eventually I exhausted all the possible means of bringing about his end. Garbos, in the meantime, invented new ways of persecuting me. Sometimes he hung me by the arms on a branch of an oak tree, leaving Judas loose underneath. Only the appearance of the priest in his dogcart caused him to discontinue the game. The world seemed to close over my head like a massive stone vault. I thought of telling the priest what was going on, but I was afraid he would just admonish Garbos and give him a chance to beat me again for complaining. For a while I planned to escape from the village, but there were many German outposts in the neighborhood, and I was afraid that, if I was caught by them again, they would take me for a gypsy bastard, and then who knows what might happen to me. One day I heard the priest explaining to an old man that for some prayers God granted 100 or 300 days of indulgence. When the peasant failed to understand the meaning of these words, the priest went into a long exposition. From all this I understood that those who say more prayers earn more days of indulgence, and that this was also supposed to have immediate influence in their lives. In fact, the greater the number of prayers offered, the better one would live, and the smaller the number, the more troubles and pain one would have to endure.